All right, we are live. Hello, everybody. Today, we're going to talk about how to find your life purpose, how to tap into your flow state at will using evidence-based neuroscience techniques, and how to break perfectionism in half by interviewing Dr. Eugene Choi, a mindset coach and former filmmaker and pharmacist obsessed with neuroscience. Welcome to The Inner Creator, a podcast focused on helping creators learn more about the art, business, and inner mindset of being a creator. I'm your host, Peter Su. I'm a former investment banker at Goldman Sachs, turned singer-songwriter and content creator here in San Francisco. Today, our special guest is Dr. Eugene Choi. He's a certified transformational mindset coach and board-certified clinical pharmacist that helps talented, heart-driven leaders operate at their highest levels of clarity, energy, and focus. Utilizing his expertise in clinical pharmacy, neuroscience, and business coaching, his unique science-backed process, along with the use of groundbreaking technology, helps entrepreneurs figure out how to dramatically improve performance, innovate solutions, and achieve their goals. He's the host of the Neurohacking podcast, and his articles have been featured on Entrepreneur, Success Magazine, Thought Catalog, and he's reached over 10 million people to date with his work. And he's helped and coached hundreds of business leaders transform their results, both professionally and personally. And also, in a previous life, he was also a filmmaker for Jubilee Media, where he made films with more than 25 million views. All right, Eugene, thank you so much. Welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Oh, and before we keep going, like, do you prefer to go as Eugene or Dr. Eugene Choi? Like,
I'm not big on titles. You can just call me Eugene, but yeah, like
okay.
publicly it's listed with the credentials, but Eugene is fine.
Okay, nice. Well, so I think everyone knows you today as you are the neuroscience guy. You are the mindset coach.
hmm
You help people shift from that fight, flight, survival, freeze mode to that abundance mindset, that executive state. Like, I think you're really well known for that now. You've had like articles go viral, things like that. But can you take us back to kind of why did you originally, like, how did you end up on this path as a mindset coach?
Yeah, I wish it was like a straight line, but it wasn't. It was a lot of like what people might call soul searching, right? So, I quit the pharmacy life initially because I just wasn't satisfied with it. Um, Went into filmmaking for a little bit and doing that for a few years, ran out of money, went back to pharmacy. And kind of what came together when I went back to pharmacy, I ended up getting promoted and, I had a really cushy job. I was managing like 6 major hospitals and over 250 plus clinics. For a lot of people, that's the end of the road, right? It's like it doesn't get any better than that. And I just remember sitting at my desk one day and I was just like, I don't want to. I just had my second kid and I was just like, I don't want to be that parent that tells their kid what to do with their life with my words. I want to be that parent that can show it to them through my life. And, I was doing that soul searching, like that quote unquote find your passion journey. And looking back on it, there was a couple of things I realized. The one thing I realized was the filmmaking aspect. It wasn't the actual filmmaking that I enjoyed. Because to give you an example, that 23 million viral video that I created, I helped create, and I edited it. It took me 7 months to edit that. Right? Like me and Jason were like working on it for so long and like trying to get it to where it got to. Um, and it's just very labor intensive, which makes sense why, if you look at feature films, it can take years to make it. So, and I was sitting there going like, well, what is it that I enjoyed so much about it? And then that's when I realized it was the storytelling aspect. Why? Because if you think about it, as adults, we sit in a dark room at the movie theater to be essentially told a story for an hour or two, right? And I'm like, why is that? Well, it's because every main character in a film undergoes this phenomenal internal transformation at the end of the day. They change. And I think all of us deep down crave that transformation for ourselves, which is why we enjoy these stories so much. And that's when I sat there and thought to myself, well, how do you make this happen in real life? And that's when the neuroscience part came. My healthcare background came full circle. And that's kind of when everything just came together and clicked. I was just like, oh, if everyone understood some basic neuroscience and applied it to their life without me throwing all this jargon at you, and it could be transformative. And long story short, I tested it out over the years and been watching that unfold, and I've been doing it ever since.
Can you take us through like what's because you've coached like hundreds of entrepreneurs at this
Yeah.
point. Um, can you take us through kind of a transformation that you help support and what that looked like?
Yeah. Like the whole process
Yeah, or
that I
just
bring a
yeah,
person
yeah.
through. Yeah, absolutely. So, it's if I sum it up, it's in 3 phases. The first phase is awareness, self-awareness, and this is actually one of the biggest parts for people first, because we think we're aware of certain things, but there's usually a deeper level of awareness that needs to be unfolded. So the first phase is awareness. The second phase is training. That's where like the science part comes in. We just have to educate ourselves on certain things. And the last part is implementation. So once you implement, you get to experience the benefits of it for yourself. So that's kind of at a high level the journey I bring every person through that I personally work with.
Got it, got it. And just kind of in your own personal journey, like rewinding a bit, like I found it to be really interesting when you talked about something a lot of us go through, which is like you mentioned, like that soul searching, finding more meaning in life.
Yeah.
And in your neurohacking podcast, you talk about how out of school you're making six figures,
Yeah.
and now this is your life, and it kind of started to feel like Groundhog Day. Can you take us through what that felt like, and kind of the decisions of yeah, like how you personally left that state of going through the motions and stepping into who you really are.
It felt so painful, honestly. I think that's one of the things. It's like, you know, to give a little more context, I grew up pretty poor. Like, my dad was a failed entrepreneur. He ruined his credit, and when he couldn't take out any more loans, he used my mom's name to take out loans and ruined her credit. So that was my upbringing. We just had no money. We were in so much scarcity that I developed this belief. I thought maybe if I just make money, then everything will get better. And I graduate at the time, before I applied to college, on the Korean newspaper, like pharmacist was the most in demand job. And and a lot of Korean parents were talking about it, right? My parents could care less. They were surprised that I went to pharmacy school. But I graduated. I remember like getting that paycheck. It's just like, oh, six-figure salary. It was very anticlimactic. You know what I mean? It's like I had the nice sports car, the new apartment, all that kind of stuff, newly married, and there's still a lot of pain there, whether it was depression, anxiety, stress on a daily basis. And I think it got to the point where I just got so jaded. Like one of those moments in your life where you're just in so much pain, like you've tried everything. Like I was just like, you know
Yeah.
what? Like I'll just go. Like, what's the cost of not doing something? Me not doing something will cost. It'll just be more stress, more depression, more anxiety. So you know what? Let me give this a try, right? Like kind of thing. And I quit. And I went on a 2-month long cross country road trip with my wife and had the time of my life. And that's kind of when everything started, despite plenty of ups and downs happening after that.
Well, okay. So one thing that was really fascinating to me about your story is how you on the soul searching you were like. Can you tell us a little bit more about when you went to India, like Rio, like
Oh yeah.
what you learned from those experiences? Yeah.
So before I quit, yes, there was a lot of soul searching happening, and how I did that was through a lot of traveling. So I volunteered a lot on these, whether it's like like a church mission trip where I would lead a team, or I would go out on my own for like humanitarian purposes to volunteer and stuff. Um, the irony is just like, man, maybe if I keep serving other people, I'll feel more fulfilled. Um, but I got even more jaded. You know what I mean? Like, I would have these experience like you're bringing up Rio, that's a story I do share a lot, where it's one of the most violent cities in the world. Like 70% of the kids that live in the slums there, which is where I stayed for a month, don't live past 21 years old because of all the gun violence that happens, and they all get into drug trafficking. And yeah, this was an environment where every day I was hearing gunshots at night, because people were shooting. And then 3 times while I was there, the Brazilian SWAT team came in and raided the favelas, and they were literally in an all-out gunfight with the drug traffickers there. And it was like this cognitive dissonance. Here I am in one of the most violent cities in the world, but I'm also finding one of the most beautiful communities I've ever been in. Like you'd have these kids that lived in houses that only had 3 walls. When I would buy them like a bag of candy or something like that, their first action is to take out a piece of candy and share it with me. Do you see what I'm saying? Like when you start seeing like these like it kind of messes with your brain a little bit. And you have these like experiences whether it was in Kolkata, India, where I did work with like Mother Teresa's organization, or in Thailand, working with organizations that helped, victims of human trafficking and all that kind of stuff. One of the things that I realized was like you come back home and you get so jaded because you're back to your first world country with your friends, and your friends are complaining about the same boss or the new car part that they want to buy, while I just came back from like poverty, right? You know what I mean? Like, um, at the time it jaded me a lot. It created a lot of, cognitive dissonance. You're like,
Mhm.
how can these two realities exist at the same time? But looking back on it, it was such a gift. You know what I mean? Like it helps your mind expand. It helps you see things from a different perspective. And there's a lot of science behind that too. Novelty is a really healthy thing for your brain. Um, but yeah, man, like it was like, um, yeah, it's been a while since I like thought about those times. It's eye opening. You know what I mean? Like once you see it, you can't unsee it, if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah, I remember after moving out of LA as a musician, I went to figure out if I wanted to keep doing music or not. And so I went to this yoga teacher training in India. So I was in an ashram doing like the 200
Awesome.
hour yoga teacher training, and we're
Oh
basically
yeah.
meditating every day for like
Yes.
doing yoga for like 6 hours a day. I did that backpack for like a month around India by myself. And then I came back and it was April this time of year back in LA. And then I'm at Coachella with my friends.
Hmm.
And I went from being a vegetarian, not drinking. I had lost like 15, 20 pounds to like my friend has like this platter of like Costco shrimp and he wants me to take shots. And I was just like, oh my gosh, this is so crazy. So yeah, what you're talking about, like it really resonates, like that perspective shift
Yeah.
after traveling. And
And kind of like the image of like a blacksmith kind of comes, it's like it really sharpens you. I think experiences like that when you go through these kinds of new experiences in your life. And I've been hooked ever since because you keep growing, you keep expanding as a result of it. Because I think staying the same is one of the most painful things at the end of the day, that at some point you'll come face to face with it and you'll finally want to do something about it.
well, how'd you get over, a lot of people that are working in professional jobs, you know, when I was at Goldman VC, I think I had the daydream of, oh, one day I'm gonna write something
Yeah.
or write some songs, and one day I'll do this. And then the years fly by, and you're like, oh, I'm still doing this. Oh, I'm making a good money. Oh, I'm comfortable. Oh, it's too hard to give. Like, how did you over? What were things that almost held you back from quitting, and how did you get over those?
I mean, definitely the comfort. The comfort was holding me back from quitting, right? Because I didn't quit right after I graduated. It took me 3 years to muster up the ability to do that. I think another thing that definitely helped is my wife. Like she was very supportive. She was whatever I decided. Like I was just like, "What do you think about taking a cross country road trip for 2 months and try this filmmaking out?" Like this group called Jubilee invited me to work with them full time. It's like, okay, right. So support, I think, is definitely a huge aspect. As a recovering lone wolf, work hard by myself in a silo, right? Like I had that kind of struggle. Um, how I actually don't view it as like I overcame it. I
Hmm,
think just I think the pain was just I became so aware of the pain that was inside that was always there. I became so much more aware of it that like it's a feeling, right? It just keeps gnawing at you. So
hmm,
it just got so loud that I was just willing to try. And I just remember what's I'm trying to think about what sparked it. It was just like, yes, it was that pain of like staying the same, pain of like I keep saying one day, one day, one day, but the one day is not coming. And I remember like a coworker too. I was just like, just trying to have small talk with a coworker one day at work. And I was just like, how long have you been working? And she's like, like over 30 years. I'm like, wow, like you must have seen a lot of like changes and stuff throughout. She's like, no, not really. It's like, at the end of the day, this is pretty much it. And I was just like, oh,
Like 30
don't
years
want that.
fast forward, that's
Yeah.
gonna be you.
I'm like,
It's
I don't want
exactly the
that.
same.
I don't want that. So that's kind of when I was just like, okay, like I'm gonna try something. I don't know where this is gonna end up. I was willing to just go into that uncertainty. And I just remember, the thing that reinforced me to continue on this path, I was on like a 9-hour stretch drive from, I forget, I think we're in the middle of Montana or something. It was just a long drive. And there's something really, for me, I liked it. Like, there's something therapeutic about just being on the road, like for these long stretches.
Yeah, yeah.
And I remember just having this feeling, like something was speaking to me, and like not like a voice in your head, but like you can feel it, right? Where, call it God, the universe, whatever you want to call it, right? Like, but something was there. And I just remember feeling it so deeply, where this communication was coming through to me, where it was just like, for one of the first times in your life, you're giving me something to work with. Meaning, like, all up to that point, I was just complaining. Like, one day I'll do this, or I really want this, or I wish this was fixed in my life, that was fixed in my life. And all I did was complain, or you know what I mean? Like, or just
Yeah,
sit there daydreaming. One day I will do this. But
yeah.
like, it was like this deep communication of like, for the first time, you were willing to step into that unknown space, and you're just giving me something to work with. Now I have something to work with, because up to this point, you were giving me nothing to work with. You're just complaining, right? Like, you're just treating me like a vending machine, and like expecting me to be your maid, and like, right?
Yeah.
But this I can work with, right? So that's kind of what got me the first step of being comfortable with taking a risk, if that makes sense, like a bigger risk in my life. And it's paid off ever since.
Yeah, so you stepped out from, like, you talk about going from having the victim mentality of blaming everything else around you into like
Exactly.
the ownership, like you are in control. You take that step and you're and when I heard your story and your podcast, like you're driving out of New York and your family's all there. Like, and I was telling you this earlier, like when you talk about how you're leaving New York and you're realizing everything you're leaving behind to move to LA to see this filmmaking dream, like your mom called out to you and was weeping. Like I got chills in that moment. Can you take us through how that felt and how did you, yeah, how did that feel in that moment?
It was really emotional. There was a lot of fear there, right? My mom was afraid. I was deep down afraid, but trying to hold it together, right? Creating this new step in my life, this new chapter in my life. I mean, dude, like, I remember my grandma walked up to me like literally the day of, where like we had this nice family dinner together with my family, and my wife's family out in Rhode Island. And my grandma comes up to me, she's like, "Who's gonna take care of your mom?" Right? Like the day of, you know what I mean? Like, so it didn't help, right? Like the fact that I'm leaving, and it was, but I knew deep down my mom wouldn't have it any other way. Like, why would she want to be the reason for me blaming her for not taking a chapter, a risk to
Hmm.
grow?
Hmm.
And in fact, she was always the total opposite. She was always super supportive, and it was super emotional. And it's like, when you're starting a new chapter in your life, like you're saying, like, it is our decision. And I think that's what it is. Bottom line, it's like, are you willing to make the decision to start this new chapter? And it takes a lot of courage. And I think, looking back on that moment, yeah, it was really emotional. But I do remember it came from a place of decisiveness, not from a place of like, I'm searching from something out there to fulfill me in here. It was like, hey, I'm making a decision. I'm well aware of the risks. For all I know, I could fall flat on my face, which we did get broke, right? Like after a few years. But yeah, man, like that's why I have this little painting back there. I don't know if you can really see it, but
Mm,
like
okay.
it's a painting of Mulan. I really
Cool.
love it, because it's the moment where if you know the story, it's the moment where she cut her hair to
Mm, yeah.
join the
Yep.
army in
Yep.
place of her father. And I once got to coach this lady. She wrote this quote, like, courage doesn't always roar, right? It's that quiet voice saying sometimes that I'll try again tomorrow. And it became viral at the time before virality even existed. Like it was during 9/11, like they were posting that quote everywhere. Anyway, like she's this author, and that quote always reminded me of like, what does courage actually look like? Most people think courage is the epic climactic scene in the movie where like the villain and the bad guys going like the final boss, you're going all out. But that's not really the courageous moment, because when you're already there, when you're, you know what I mean? In that moment, like it's already too late. Like you have no choice. You have to make a decision, right? Like you have to, you're in it. And I realized courage comes from those quiet moments when you're at home, you're packing your backpack and you're going, I'm starting the journey. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And that's what that moment was like for me, of like leaving my mom. I'm like, this is my moment where I'm making a conscious decision, not a reactive one, to start this journey. And that's why I carry that painting with me, because it reminds me of what is courage. It's when you're at home in the quiet moments in the daily life of the mundane, and you just made a decision to change. I think it's really as simple as that, honestly.
Man, I just got chills with this, imagining packing the bag, about to start the journey. Like, yeah, because when I drove down to LA to after VC to be a musician, I felt like your story resonates, because it's like, wow, when I get on the five, I've driven down the five so many times, like this SF to LA, it's like 6 hours. I'm gonna stop at the Arby's, like I always do. But this time, well, when I moved, it's like I'm not coming back, and I don't know what's ahead of me. And when you talk about when you're going down to when you drove to LA from New York, it's like you. I love how you talked about, yeah, you didn't know how it was going to turn out, but this is a decisive move. So when you got to LA, can you tell us like what was it like living with Jason and the whole Jubilee team? And for those of you who are listening out there, it's Jubilee is I put them up there with like Wong Fu and all those like YouTube kind of pioneers. Um, yeah, like what was it like living in that house?
Oh man, it was a ton of fun. And it was also an emotional roller coaster. You know what I mean? Like, at the time, they also, the three original founders, also quit their day jobs the year before, right? One of them, Eddie, he left the White House. He had to write a letter of resignation to Obama, right? Like to quit. Jason, right? He left behind finance, kind of like you, at Bain. And then Eric, he was a Harvard med student. He took a year off of Harvard med school. It's like every Asian parent's worst nightmare,
Yeah, that is
right?
their nightmare.
Right? Yeah.
Exact nightmare.
But yeah, there was just this common understanding that like, hey, we're figuring things out. We're figuring things out together. I did get, honestly, from an emotional level, I did get burnt out because it was a lot of work, right? Like that, like there was a lot of soul searching still happening at the time. On top of experiencing the joy of meeting all those people, like they're friends with Wong Fu, they're friends, you know what I mean? Like they're all there,
Mhm,
like just
mhm.
meeting these cool people. Um, and then, yeah, like multiple pieces that we made got big. It went viral. Like I got to fly out to Houston to run a project for Jeremy Lin and film with him and hang out with him, like stuff like that, you know?
Yeah.
It was a lot of fun. It's cool, you know? And I learned a ton. I think that's where I got a lot of my marketing skills from. Like the reason I credit my article, like one of my articles going super viral, was from having created viral videos with them. It's like, it's not by accident. There's a method to the madness. You know what I mean? Like creating content that gets shared. There's a process to it that if you keep repeating it, at some point one's going to pop. So I learned a ton, and it was fun. Yeah, it was a lot of
Can
fun. I wouldn't
can you
change it.
yeah, I mean, and you got to work with Jeremy while he's in Houston. Like this is fresh off of Linsanity. That's crazy. And it's
Correct.
him and Hardin. That's like peak Jay Lin. That's yeah, I used to go to jeremylin.net like every day for like a few, like probably 3-4 years.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
so you got to work with people like that. Like so you talk about, I mean, your videos, they have like 25, 23 million views. That if you actually think about that, that's like 23 million like views. Is if you put all those people in a room, that's like a city, like a huge city,
Yeah, yeah,
like Seoul or something.
yeah.
So you worked with Jubilee and you kind of cracked the code on how to go viral. Like, can you, for all the creators listening out there, like what are some things that helped you tell a better story, helped you to spread a meaningful message, but also connect with people? It didn't get lost as just a nonprofit positive message that no one ever hears about. It was both meaningful and widespread. Like, how'd you guys do that?
As a creator, in terms of virality, that's kind of what I mean. I could talk about the psychology behind it as well as the framework, but I think the bottom line is virality is really about connection. I think a lot of creators, when they're operating from like limiting beliefs and fear, it's actually like a call for attention. Like, please affirm me. I have a low opinion about myself. Please make me feel better about myself. And that's why the art doesn't really connect with people. When you're in a really empathetic state, then you understand that the art you're creating is meant to build connection versus gain fame. Is this making sense? So one of the things I learned about virality is just like, how do we create content that resonates with people? It's interesting because I it was like kind of like as a joke, right? Like,
Mm.
one of the metrics we would measure with our content, it was a lot of short films at the time before they shifted their content a lot now, and it's gotten really big, obviously. But at the time, it was just like, let's look in the room when we're showing our pieces and see how many people cry, right? Like, it has to create some sort of emotional resonance.
Mm.
And that's what it is at the end of the day. Does it have an emotional shift for the viewer because they resonate with it? That's number one, right? And usually, number two is like, how do you shift the perspective? Right? How do you create enough of an emotional shift that makes me want to share this? Because virality is really about shareability. When I watch something, it makes me want to share it. Why
Mhm.
would I want to share it? Guess what? It's because it makes me look better. Do you see what I'm saying? I share something funny with someone because it makes me look like the person that shared this cool thing with you. That's the motivation for virality for each individual that's sharing it. So that's something to think about. It's like, what would make someone want to share your content? Number one, it has to resonate with them. Like, take the spotlight off of yourself, right? Because there's a saying in marketing, tune into everyone's favorite radio station, WIIFM, which is what's in it for me.
Yep. Yep.
And that's a skill I learned. It's like, okay, like, just put myself out of the picture. What is this person viewing this content? How can we help them? How can we help them shift the perspective? How can we help them feel better today? How can we help them with this today so that it actually benefits them, right? Because as a reward, as a thank you for your attention, right? Attention is the new commodity now in the online space, if you think about it.
Yeah, yeah. Chris Rock with his special, he talks about that's like basically the whole world. It's like these days it's just all run on attention. Well, so so it's like emotional resonance, shifting the perspective. So you were making films, and then I know you talked about like you wanted it, you enjoyed the storytelling aspect of it.
Mhm,
Like, so when I was in LA, I think I was in LA around the same time actually, and I was in LA for like 5 years making music, and eventually I also ran out of money. Like,
mhm,
I had some moderate success, like I sold out the Hotel Cafe, recorded at Prince's LA studio, did a small tour around the US, like, but it was hard to keep it going. Like, how? And then so I eventually, um, I went to the yoga teacher training to figure out. It's like, and I was like, okay, my life in LA, should I quit music like as a career? It was like, or should I keep going? And like, I read The Dip by Seth Godin. It's like,
mhm.
if it's something worth meaning, if it's worth fighting for, then you fight for it. But then when I thought about it, I was like, what I'm actually doing more of is still validating myself versus validating others. So
Right.
maybe I don't need to like stand on this hill, and I should go back to SF, get stable. I also wanted to try out what it was like to be in startups. But like, what was it like for you to you were pursuing your dream as a filmmaker in LA to go back to pharmacy?
Oh, it was like a tail between my legs feeling. Like, I was embarrassed. I was depressed. Because we literally ran out of money. Like, the team at Jubilee, we were taking turns crying when we're like doing our morning, like, because we're all like, there was times where we were really struggling. Um, so yeah, I kind of had to go back because I found out my wife was pregnant at the time. We didn't have any benefits, right? So I had to take
Mm.
what I could get. So it was a lot of like this tail between the legs moment. Um, yeah, like, that's what it felt like. It was a lot of like, it was a down moment for sure.
Yeah, I resonate with that. When I remember coming back to Mountain View, like it's like a few blocks from Google, having a beer with some friends during like the playoffs, and like an acquaintance came up to, he's like, "Oh, Peter, you're back from LA," and I was like, "Yeah." And I didn't really want to talk about what happened. I just wanted to enjoy the basketball game. And then he's like, well, I guess pursuing your passion, it doesn't always make sense. Or he said something like I guess it's it it's not follow what you love and things will work out. And and then I was just like, I guess. And I just kept drinking my beer. It was like, but I do think it is one of those learning moments. Like, it's like, okay, like what did I get out of the experience and what did I learn? And the funny thing is, even though I ran out of money, it's like, I would never trade that. I would do it 100% again, because I just enjoy the process so much. Like, every day writing songs,
Yeah.
collabing with people, getting on stage, driving to the beach to play. Like, yeah. So how it's like for you, how did you transition? Like, so you like, how did it feel to be back in pharmacy? And then what eventually helped you find neuroscience?
Yeah. I didn't like it being back in pharmacy. I took a job at a hospital, right? And I was not wanting to become full time there, but that's the only way I could have gotten benefits. And the only available position at the time was an overnight shift. So it felt like a huge downgrade because I built up seniority in New York as a pharmacist. Like in the pharmacy world and in the hospitals, like the people with the least seniority are the ones that work overnight. So starting from the ground up, and I just remember like it was tough because we'd be working I forget like 12-hour shifts for 8 days in a row, and then you would get 6 days off, 8 days in a row. And I just had my daughter. My first kid was
Oh
just
my
born.
gosh.
So I'm like sleeping during the day, awake at night, leaving at night. And I remember just weeping one time, like holding my daughter, going like, I don't know what I'm gonna do. Like, I don't want this to be my life, like working overnight. So over time, I was sitting there, I'm just like, you know what? Like, number one is I accepted the scenario. Like, I was just like, all right, I'm here. Kind of like you, like, I wouldn't trade my experiences for the world. I'm glad I went through them. And, the other funny thing is just like, it's interesting how much scarier the anticipation feels than when that fear thing actually comes to fruition. You know what I mean? Like, I hit like $5 in the bank account. That's the thing you were afraid of this whole time. And it happened. And you're sitting there going like, oh, this is what it feels like. It's like, okay. It's like, all right, what do we do now? Okay, I'll go find a job. You know what I mean? Like it
Yeah.
felt not as like painful as do you get what I'm saying? Like
Yeah.
it's the
Yeah. Yeah.
anticipation that just felt so much scarier. So anyway, and I would just reflect more and more. I was still trying to work on my business. I was like dabbling in things. I think I was trying to get into like real estate maybe I was just like trying stuff out. And I remember I'm sitting there going like, you know what? I'm done. Like there's unnecessary drama happening here in my job. Like, why don't I just at least in the pharmacy world try to figure out something that I like doing and apply that to my role? So it's just like it came to me that I was just like, okay, then that's leadership. Okay,
Mm.
maybe I'll see how I can become a supervisor. So I would ask the supervisors there. So I'm like, how did you become supervisor? They're like, I don't know, I just applied. I'm like, okay, I'll do that. So I just started applying a couple of interviews. Some people actually call me back for interviews, and I ended up getting a role as a supervisor where I found that afterwards that somebody else that had like 10 plus years experience in that kind of role, they chose me over that dude, even though I had no experience in the role because they liked my learning passion so much. Like
Mm.
with the filmmaking, they liked that I learned things quickly because they didn't want someone who just thinks in the same way and try to bring that. And you have to try to retrain their mindset in the
Mm.
role.
Mm.
And I got chosen for that. And then that's kind of how I got my supervisor job. It was such a cushy job. I mean, like I was a supervisor on paper, but I actually didn't have anyone to supervise because each person I supervised reported to their specific hospital. You know what I mean? So it was such a nice job. And then, yeah, that's kind of how I applied that. And that's what enabled me to just sit there and I'd be working on my business on the side. I'm like, you know what? That kind of like I shared earlier that it came to that moment where I'm just like, I don't want to be that parent that just tells their kid what to do because I could stop here. We're making plenty of money. Like, you know what I mean? And my wife was on her way to getting licensed as a nurse because she transitioned her career as well. And like, we would have been fine. But then, um, yeah, I viewed it as like another launch pad, so to speak. So I used some of the funds that I made from as a pharmacist supervisor, I invested in a business coach. I coughed up like $20,000. And that's when I learned, a lot of creatives have no business skills, including myself at the time.
Yeah, yeah.
Right, because that's the big thing, is like the whole struggling artist thing, right? But like, once I took that opportunity, I invested in a business coach, and I started applying everything they were teaching me, and that's when I got like 1 million views on my articles in less than a year. And then that's just started putting me on the map. They saw my growth, and they're like, hey, we want to hire you to be a business coach because we have more clients coming in. We need more coaches. I'm like, I don't have any business coaching experience. And they're like, it's okay, the CEO is going to train you. I'm like, oh, when else do I have this opportunity
Wow.
where a CEO that built a multi-million-dollar business will apprentice me to learn business? And this can be great for my business. And they knew it was a mutual benefit kind of scenario. So I took like a 70+% pay cut for that. But I credit that for me being able to build a sustainable business as a result of it. Everything I learned about business, I learned from them. And that's kind of how the neuroscience stuff came into place as well.
God, I love it. Yeah, it's like I remember watching Justin Kahn, who founded Twitch, and he's like, he was talking about why you should join a startup. And the number one reason was because of what you can learn. And if the
Oh my
learning's
gosh, yeah.
exponential, then the title and money, those things are secondary. So it's cool to hear, like, in your journey, you basically got to learn from the best. So Live Joyfully Designed, in the audience is asking, how did you find a good business coach that was worth plunking down 20K for?
Yeah, yeah. It's I don't think there was a method to it. I think I ended up in someone's email list. They were running an event, and these guys were running an event in San Diego. I went to the event. It was like a 3-day like training. I don't know if you've ever been to, like, real estate was famous for this structure. They run like a 3-day event, like at a cruise or something, and they're gonna pitch you like a $20,000 package on day 3. It was that kind of model. And
Mhm.
then I was just like, you know what? One of the things that was different about them, the company's called Mercy. Now I consider him a good friend of mine, the CEO, and they made it a guarantee. They made you a guarantee. Like, if you don't figure out the next steps for your business and make your money back through the work we do together, we'll work with you as many additional sessions as it takes at no cost. We can guarantee that you'll get the results, assuming you're committing to take the steps that we recommend, right? So then for me, it was just like, all right, why not? Like, I'll try it out. And then poof, results started happening because I applied it. I think at the end of the day, a lot of this stuff, like, one of the things I say is like, you know what, business practice, it's pretty simple. It's not some secret you're looking for. There's just good best practices that if you commit, you'll see results over time, versus it being this get rich quick overnight success. Right. Um, and that's kind of what got me to it. I was just like, I talked to my wife. I'm like, hey, it's going to be 20K. Um, at the time, right? Like, I was making a $200,000 per year salary. So it's just, it wasn't like this, I'm spending my life savings on it,
Mhm, mhm.
if you know what I mean.
Yeah, yeah.
It was another deciding moment, like a decisive moment. Like, I'm going into this. I don't want to be that parent that tells their kids what to do. This is my way of trying to go at it again, what this find your purpose thing is.
And what was one of the biggest things you learned and applied that helped you make that shift,
At that moment.
or from the coaching?
Oh yeah. So number one is the value of receiving support. Like, sometimes all it takes is just one nugget to shift the trajectory of your life. So for example, with the business coaching experience, like when I hired the business coach, he was like, okay, you're writing all these articles on your website. Do you have traffic? I'm like, not really. It's like, are people reading your stuff? No, yeah, like my friends aren't even reading them. Right? It's like, well, why don't you just, because your content's good, why don't you just put your content where people can see it then? I was just like, what do you mean? It's like, there's this thing called guest blogging. All these big, sites that have millions of people going to their site for content are looking for good content creators. And in exchange for exposure, they're happy to put your article up. Right. I was just like, oh, so then that's when I was just like, oh, I would pitch to like these big personal development platforms at the time, whether it's like Lifehack, Thought Catalog. And they were just like, oh, this is great. We'll take it. And they put it up. And then that kind of built my audience. People were signing up for my email list and all that kind of stuff. That's kind of what got me a little bit of exposure. And then because I started getting good at that, that's when they offered me the position. So then that's when I learned how to coach. They gave me coaching training and all that kind of stuff. And I learned a ton from that too. Like I remember the CEO like had this like pep talk with me. He's like, remember, this is live ammo. I was just like, that's right. These are real businesses that you're coaching. The whole team is here to support you, but like, just don't forget that. Like, don't be a gunslinger and like just do things without thinking. Like, make sure you feel informed in your decisions and your recommendations and all that kind of stuff. So I was just like, I was watching a ton of Shark Tank at the time, and like I was just studying nonstop. And then over time, it was just learning by doing, right? Once you
Mhm.
coach like 30 plus entrepreneurs, and then now you're starting to see results, right? Like first 5-figure launch that you did with the client and they made 5 figures in the weekend, and then your 6-figure launch with another client, all that kind of stuff, right? And you're seeing all these results and realizing, oh, like this stuff works. So then that's kind of how that evolved. And then where I found a lot of people still getting stuck though, in creating more revenue for their businesses, was it's all here, right? So much
Mhm. Mhm.
fear, so much what will people think, so much all of that. So then that's when I started getting really passionate about that. I'm like, how do you figure this out? Oh my God, my healthcare background came full circle. Oh my gosh, I discovered neuroscience. Oh, no wonder people are behaving this way when they're dealing with this or that. I can actually explain it at a scientific level. And then I started teaching that. And then that's when you start seeing some like really cool breakthroughs in clients. And then, um, long story short, that's when my article went viral. And then I made in a week what I would have made in a year with them. So that's when my wife was like, what would it look like if you spent full time doing this now as your own business? And then that's kind of how I took off another launching point from there.
Amazing. It's like, so how did you feel? So if I understand you correctly, you felt more comfortable giving advice because you were just doing it and then you'd see results from the advice you were giving. And then so you felt even more confident as a coach. Is that fair to say?
Yes. It was that, and I was also building my own business at the time. So it helped that I was in the trenches with my clients because I knew how they were feeling. I knew what they were going through. And I was always, but still, what was always the case for majority of my clients was I was kind of like, in terms of the business stuff, I was always like a step ahead, at least. It wasn't like 10 steps ahead, but like, like I generated 1 million views on my articles, you know what I mean, already, right? I created
Yeah.
viral videos. Like I was leveraging all of the skills I built to that point to help my clients, right?
Amazing. And then you discovered neuroscience. And yeah, this part I really want to dive into, the meat and potatoes of this interview. Like, because I know a lot of the people you work with, like you mentioned, business owners, creatives, entrepreneurs, their mindset, they might feel anxious, they might feel like they're blocked, or there's the stakes are too high, they're paralyzed, they're depressed, so much uncertainty.
Yeah.
Um, and it just keeps getting worse as the weeks go on, especially in an entrepreneurial role. Like, can you take us through just like, yeah, what can someone do? Like, can you take us through how they can get out of that, and what are some concrete steps they can do
100%. Yeah.
to tap into their flow state, into that
Yes.
abundant mindset?
Yes. So the thing to understand is if we're not in the flow state, something's blocking it. And a lot of times people are just not even aware what's blocking it. So that's why the first most important thing is like I spend a lot of time on the awareness piece. Remember, like I do awareness training and implementation. So awareness piece is the most important first step. So that's kind of the big aha moment I had, because like there's plenty of like, gurus, therapists, coaches out there that tell you just do this, and they're doing it and they're going, it's not working in my life. It's because they're not even aware of the thing that's actually blocking them first. Doesn't mean those recommendations are bad, right? It's like, oh, I tried meditation, I tried journaling, I tried yoga. Why is it that I'm still, right? Like XYZ. It's because we're not even aware of our own selves. So that's kind of the big aha I had, was when I was studying the neuroscience, the big aha I had was like, wait a minute, like our brains, our nervous system is only ever in one of two states. Okay. It's what's either in called a survival state, which is it's what it sounds like. It's when you're feeling like a need to survive because you feel threatened in some way. But the important thing to understand about the state of survival is it's a reactive state. You're reacting without thinking. You literally can't think, because if you're in front of a tiger that's about to eat you and you start thinking, you might die. So it's the way it works is that you can't think. So what that means is if you're in a state of survival, it means that you're not able to access your critical thinking skills, your problem solving skills, your creativity. your empathy, amongst many other kind of amazing functions that your brain has. You're not able to access them when you're in a state of survival. The other state that we're in is what we call an executive state. That's when you experience flow state. That's when you experience turning on your creativity, inspiration, all that good stuff. And the big aha I had was like, wait a minute, based on research, though, we're in a state of survival, at least for like 70% of our adult lives, where you're not accessing your creativity at its fullest potential. And the reason for that is because we're in a state of emotional survival. Not because you're actually about to die, it's because we're surviving from our emotions. So what does that mean? These emotions that feel uncomfortable. So we have to reflect, how often do we feel anxious? How often do you feel stressed or frustrated, or you know what I mean? Like this blah kind of feeling. And the reason this happens is the brain can feel threatened by these uncomfortable emotions because there's research that has shown that emotional pain can be just as painful as physical pain. So boom, we go into a state of survival, and now we're reacting to our emotions. We can't think. And then that's why people have this experience of feeling stuck, lack of motivation, stress, anxiety, depression on a daily basis. And like, if we can make sense of this for ourselves, it's what gives you the ability to change it and shift it. You see what I'm saying?
Mhm.
And the thing to become aware about, though, if that makes sense, then the next thing to become aware about is, wait, that makes sense based on how often I'm stressed or anxious, right? Because we're experiencing so much different stress on a daily basis now, right? With all of the stimulation we get. Um, the next thing to become aware of, if that makes sense, on why we might be in a state of survival for such a majority of our adult lives is, wait, what does survival actually look like then? So when it's in an actual life-threatening scenario, like I remember having a gun pointed at me in Rio, right? Like by one of the traffickers. Um, your brain, like when it's in fear, it only knows how to do one of three things in an actual life-threatening scenario, and it's fight, flight, or freeze. It's really obvious when the scenario is actually life-threatening. You might pick up a weapon to fight. In that scenario where I had the gun pointed at me, I chose flight. I ran back into the building because the reason we got the gun pointed at me was because like we were looking out to see if the gunfight was over, and he thought we were one of the SWAT team members, right? So flight, which is you run for your life, or freeze. Freeze is when you're so paralyzed in fear you can't move. It's analogous to playing dead, right? A lot of animals do this because if their predators like their food alive, they'll pretend to be dead. Or humans have done this in wars, for example, right? You play dead amongst the other dead bodies so that you don't get killed. So the problem is most people aren't aware of how subtle this can be on a daily aspect because of our emotional state of survival. We're surviving from our emotions. How do we survive
Mm.
from our emotions? It's the same fight, flight, freeze response. It just looks different. So, for example, a fight response in emotional survival could be when you literally get into an argument. Someone said something hurtful, you're getting scared, so you fight back, you get defensive, versus being empathetic and trying to listen and have a conversation. Now you're just two parties just trying to argue with each other, and we all know where that usually leads, not someplace productive. Um, and or like physical fights. A lot of people get into physical fights because they don't know how to deal with their emotions. Now you have to physically get into a fight. And where it gets really subtle, this was like the big aha for me, and I think this is a lot of creators, entrepreneurs, and leaders as well that struggle with this, is the subtle fight responses. So for example, the need to be right,
Mm.
that's a fight response. Judging other people, gossiping, that's a fight
Mm.
response. Why? Because
Mhm.
I carry some sort of negative perspective about myself or an insecurity. I feel the need to fight and put other people down to make me feel better about myself. You see what I'm saying? When we're in that kind of fight mode. Um, the need to prove myself, that's a fight response. Because why do I need to prove it? It means it's because I already don't believe it. I need to prove it to myself. So these are all fight responses. And I think when people get really aware of this, then they have the ability to create that transformation that they're looking for to begin with, right? People pleasing is another fight response. To say yes to someone even though you don't want to say yes, in hopes that you'll get their affirmation or their approval in some way. You see what I'm saying? So we don't set boundaries, and it usually leads to resentment, right? And I share stories about this because to make it really clear, because the fight response, I'm a recovering fighter as well. We all have it. That's the big one I realize for a lot of people that it's hard to be aware of. So if you feel the need, because it's glorified in the media, isn't it? The person who fights, and I started with $100 in my pocket. But from a brain perspective, it's very unhealthy. It always leads to burnout, and it always leads to a lack of fulfillment. So what does the fight response look like? I shared 2 stories. One story is like, I had a client, he achieved everything you could want on paper. Like, we have this kind of similar experience, right? Like, you achieve what you thought you
Mhm.
wanted. And he was in his 60s now. He had the multi-million dollar business, beautiful home, beautiful family, everything. He's like, why am I still so stressed and anxious and all that kind of stuff? We're talking about the fight response. He's like, oh my gosh, I spent my whole life in the fight mode. I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, I had to prove to people that I'm better than my older brother, because his older brother was an NFL football player. And his high school football coach told him, you're never going to be as good as him. So when we get hurt, sometimes we spend our lives fighting to change things on the outside, but it never helps the inside feel any better. So he accomplished, but no matter what he accomplished, it didn't fulfill him. And that's what the fight response does when we're in the fight mode. It will lead to burnout. And the second thing why this is a very important thing to be aware of, especially in the leadership space or as a creative too, is I had another client start debating with me. He's like, no, you need the fight response. You need the survival state at certain other times than when you're about to die, right? I'm like, no, it's really neurologically, biologically speaking, you only need it when you're about to die, like a gun's pointed to your head or a tiger's about to eat you. He's like, you don't understand. I hit rock bottom. I remember when I hit rock bottom, I had to keep my head down, my shoulder up, and I was bashing through concrete wall after concrete wall to get to where I got to, because he built like an Inc. 5000 fastest growing business, multi-million dollar business, right?
Mhm.
So I was like, well, what if this is not about what you should have, could have done, because past is the past, but it's just a thought exercise. Like, what if, because you learn how to be in executive state more, even if it's just for a moment, I use this analogy back at him. It's like, you're able to put your head up and your shoulders down, even if it's just for a minute. And you see those concrete walls that you thought you had to bash through were only 3 feet wide, meaning there's many other options. But what our survival brain does is, when you're in survival state, you get into a tunnel vision. You can't see all this other information out there. If a tiger walks into your room, are you going to look anywhere else except where the tiger is? You're not. You're just going to focus on the threat. So when you're in this kind of fight, hustle, grind mode, you're missing out on other opportunities, options that probably would have been much more efficient or better. And that's where a lot of leaders make mistakes in companies. If you think about it, it's because they're so short-sighted in a tunnel vision survival state. And that's where that saying comes from: work smarter, not harder. If you're a fighter, you're a person that's working harder, probably not smarter. And usually we're probably working on the wrong thing to begin with. That's not going to get you the thing you want. So the fight response is very important to be aware of. Flight response are things like procrastination.
Mhm.
The more subtle things are when we numb ourselves. We all do this, right? There's no judgment around any of this. It's just to be aware. We all numb ourselves. Some people like to binge watch Netflix. Some people eat a tub of ice cream. Some people overindulge in things like alcohol, sex, drugs to the point of addiction. There's no judgment around it. Remember, if you judge it, it's already a fight response. You're already in survival because you're
Mhm.
uncomfortable.
Mhm.
So it's just to be aware. Oh, these are my flight responses. I numb myself because I don't want to feel the feeling I don't want to feel. And freeze is when you just don't want to make decisions. You're overwhelmed. And it also is because of things like trauma. When you're experiencing trauma, you're just paralyzed in fear. So you freeze. You get up in the morning, you don't want to get out of bed. And we do this on a daily basis for 70% of our adult lives. And if we're not aware of that, things are going to stay the same.
Yeah, it's when I hear you talk about the survival state and needing to prove yourself, I think about just in my own life, like the need to prove my self-worth by performing. So
Right.
getting into iBanking, VC, even as a musician, there was still a big element of that. I was like, oh, I need to prove that. My Goldman friends now like they're the interim CFO of Uber. Like I'm in LA. I need to crush it as a musician. Like it's I think I'm slowly shifting out of the need to validate myself and
Mm.
hopefully can start validating other people and starting to let down like my guard. And like there's this open mic I went to in LA that the whole tag was express, not impress.
Yes.
And I think going in that direction of what you're talking about, like shifting into the executive state, when I even think about it, yeah, it shifts me into like more of an abundant mindset, less scarcity. Can you take us through just what are the short-term tactics someone can use beyond awareness
Hmm.
to boom shift into
Yes.
the executive state?
Absolutely. So Number one is just being aware, right? Like, so if you're getting there, I always recommend to clients as a first step, like just make it a game. Like, make it a game. Oh, there's a survival state. Oh, that guy got cut off on the road. He's clearly angry and trying to cut the other person back off. Oh, there's a fight. That's a fight response. Or here I am procrastinating, and that's a flight response. So once you get aware of all of that, then there's tools that you can use that when you're aware of it, that's the short-term work. Is just like, how do you get yourself out of it when you're aware of it? So because you're becoming more aware, there's some tools that you can use. So some short-term things that I recommend. I can share two of them today. One is labeling your emotions. So that's like, I'm feeling anxious, I'm feeling stressed, I'm feeling angry. The reason this actually works, there's research behind it. UCLA did this study with a group of participants, and they would show photos of people's faces in survival emotions, right? It's basically any feeling that feels uncomfortable: fear, anxiety, depression, anger. Soon as they showed the photo, guess what happened in the brain scans? Because they had them all hooked up to brain scans. The survival brain immediately turned on, right? For the terminology geeks, that's your amygdala. And it immediately turned on. So now you're in a state of survival. But what was interesting was the researchers would show them, as they're showing them the photo, ask the participant, hey, can you tell me what emotion you're seeing here in this photo? And they're like, oh, that's easy. That's anxiety, or that's anger. As soon as they named that emotion, guess what? Survival state brain turned off. The executive state brain turned on, which is your frontal lobe, right? Your prefrontal cortex. And the reason this is the case is, remember, when you're in a state of survival, your brain literally can't think. For you to label something, you have to think about it, even if it's just for a quick moment. Oh, I'm feeling anxious. I'm feeling frustrated. So when you're doing that, you're literally calling on your executive state brain, which is where your emotional regulation skills come from, and all these amazing capabilities come from. And you're able to calm your brain down and get back into executive state. And one thing that's important to distinguish, I learned this from a clinical psychologist buddy of mine, is there's a difference between I am sad versus I feel sad. I am is a declarative statement. You're stating that it's your identity. I am Peter. I am Eugene. I am sad. When you're doing that, you're going to stay in a state of survival. Versus when you're saying I feel sad, you're acknowledging it's a feeling and it's not permanent. How do we know this? Because feelings come and go, don't they? Sometimes we're happy, sometimes we're sad. So that's the thing, to just as a tool. One of the things I do with clients is like, hey, there's this thing called an emotional wheel. Just Google it. There's a ton of emotions on that emotional wheel. You can have it by your computer or wherever you work on a daily basis, so that you can just remind yourself how you're feeling on a moment-to-moment basis without judgment. And
So
get really good at that.
labeling emotions, and then what? Any other tactic?
The second one's it's more widely known. It's the breath, right? Taking deep breaths. The reason why that happens is the bottom of your lungs, you have these what's called parasympathetic nerves. And when you tickle those nerves, you're signaling to your body, hey, we're not about to die. You're trying to remind your body when you're feeling anxious and your life's not actually in danger, like, hey, I wouldn't be taking a deep breath if we're about to die. So you can calm down. So when you're taking deep breaths, it helps you get back into executive state, because it's your body that responds to information first. It's the first thing to react. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So we need to calm the body down so that the brain can calm down as well. So two types of breathing I recommend is, one's called box breathing, which is a 5-second inhale. You hold that breath for 5 seconds, 5-second exhale, and you can repeat. You can do this anytime. The second type of breathing that I recommend that's fascinating, it's recommended by Andrew Huberman. He's a neuroscientist at Stanford, where they did literal scans of people breathing this way, and you would watch the body calm down. It's where you do a nice deep inhale, and then inhale a second time, and then you do a nice slow exhale. And the exhale should be longer than the inhales, if that makes sense. That's an important part. And then it calms your body down and slows things down so that your executive state brain can turn on.
Yeah, a lot of times in my when I'm working with my therapist, when I start rattling off, getting it intellectualizing all my issues and challenges, she's like,
Mhm.
she always reminds like, "Hey, Peter, what about trying to get back into our body?" And then so we'll do things like breathing, and I like to do like a 7-11 breath, like 7 in, 11 out.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
even this week I was editing my last episode and I was getting a little overwhelmed.
Yeah.
Um, and I was practicing. I was like, okay, let me try what Eugene was saying. Okay, label my emotions. I'm feeling anxious. I am feeling like my if this edit sucks, then the guests will be disappointed. Then maybe my stuff sucks, or like maybe that's a reflection of me. And then I was like labeling it, and I did start to feel better. I was like, well, that's not actually true, and I'm doing this because it's supposed to help like one person. And is it doing it?
Yeah.
Like, yeah. It's like, and then I did, I tried the box breathing, and then I was like, all right, I'm going to be a Navy SEAL and try, and like, it helped. It really helped. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's on autopilot because part of a survival mechanism, like you're mentioning, when we're intellectualizing things too much, kind of like your therapist mentioned, it's a survival mechanism. We use our logic to try to protect ourselves from our feelings when we're not good at feeling our feelings. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah.
So then a lot of men can overthink.
Yeah, I've
Yeah,
definitely, she's helped me be aware of when I intellectualize to avoid feeling,
right.
because I can talk about all the theories and all the research, read all
Yes.
the books, but if I don't feel it and face it emotionally and then process it and let it go, then it stays there. So so
That's how,
it's
yeah. And it's
huge
important to
learning.
make, it's important to make sense of why that's the case. For a lot of us men, whether it's culturally or our upbringings, like what are we told is like the definition of masculinity, whether it's directly or indirectly, right? It's don't cry, stop being such a girl,
Suck it
don't be
up.
so emotional, suck it
Mhm.
up. Being professional means leaving emotion out of the conversation. So, like, we internalize this belief that emotions are bad when that's totally not true. So then what do we use to compensate or overcompensate for the feelings we don't want to feel is our intellect, our logic. So that's why a lot of men have those types of stereotypical arguments with partners when heterosexual relationships, which is girls just trying to be seen, felt, and heard, but guys busy trying to fix the problem with their logic. Have you done this? Have you done that? Why didn't you do it this way? Why didn't you do that way? And they're like, can you just shut up and listen to me? So it's
Yeah.
important to have both. It's not
Yeah.
one or the other. It's emotion and logic. It's meant to work together, not separately.
And shifting gears into finding, I really liked in your neurohacking school, you had some modules on how to find your life purpose and then how to apply
Yes.
it to your business. Can
Mm.
you take us through just brief, like high level, how can someone who's listening out there, a creator, an entrepreneur, how can they find their life's purpose and also apply it to their business?
Yeah, there's a couple of important things to understand when you go through this journey of evolution. So, when you get really good at managing your own fight, flight, freeze responses and getting better at it, one of the things that you will realize over time, right? Because when you're in an executive state, what happens is you become empathetic versus focusing on
Mhm.
yourself. Guess who the focus is on when you're in survival? It's all about me, 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 me. And you're literally disconnecting from other people. So as you're getting better at managing that, because the training part, what's important is by the time we're about 35 years old, 90 to 95% of the brain becomes subconscious. What does that mean? It's on autopilot. It's doing things without you telling it to do it. This includes your negative thinking. This includes your habits, your negative behavior, whatever behavior that you don't like. It's all hardwired into the software programming of your brain. So every day you're just doing it without telling yourself to do it. I'm feeling anxious without telling myself to feel anxious. It's on autopilot. So when you train yourself to start changing that autopilot so that you can be in an executive state on a more moment to moment basis through that work, um, you start to begin getting clarity on what your life's, call it what you want. Everyone has a different label for it. Your life purpose, your passion, your mission in life. And the reason for it is this. The big plot twist is finding your purpose, finding your passion actually has nothing to do with you as an individual. It has everything to do with something greater than you, if this makes sense. If I think everyone's had some sort of experience like this in their life where you and a group of people had a common mission and you were all in together and you accomplished something together and it just felt like you were on top of the world. You see, people say things like, I need to find my passion, but that's actually the reason they're stuck. It's because they don't understand passion is not yours. It's something that you're willing to surrender to that's greater than yourself because you're not making things about yourself anymore. Right? One of my favorite like theological like authors, his name's C.S. Lewis.
Mhm.
He talks about humility, right? He's like, humility isn't thinking less of yourself. Because you know how people are like modest and like, oh no, it's not thinking less of you. It's just thinking about yourself less. Think about it. When you're in a moment of empathy, you don't exist. You see what I'm saying? Or if you ever if you've ever had a moment where you're listening to some music, you ever hear that phrase, I lost myself in the music.
Yeah, yeah.
You just don't exist. And what are humans restricted by? It's really by three things. We're restricted by this body suit that we've been given. We're in this body. We're restricted by time because we're always racing against the clock, right? To complete things by a certain time. And we're restricted by our environment. All the people, the circumstances. You didn't get to choose where you were born, who your parents were. But when you're in a flow state, every creative's experienced this. Don't you lose track of time. Don't you lose track of your
Yeah,
body.
I
Don't
love
you
it.
lose track of your environment. You've literally lost yourself. So when you lose yourself because you're not thinking about yourself so much anymore, about your problems, your worries, your you know what I mean? Like all the things you don't like about yourself, and you get better at doing that because you're being able to overcome your fight, flight, freeze responses that you're doing on a daily basis. You find this thing called purpose. You find this thing called clarity. And now the feeling is different. Finding your purpose, finding your mission, it feels like you're getting pulled towards something. You're attracted to it. You become unstoppable because people will tell you not to do the thing. And you're like, no, I'm going to head that direction because I found it. I found my mission I'm willing to die for. And I care about it so much that I'm just going to keep going that way, despite how uncertain this is, despite how risky it may seem for other people, versus the person who's operating in survival, trying to look for their passion, quote unquote, their passion. It's going to feel like a very push energy, like a fighting energy. I need to fight for my purpose. I need to fight for, they're never going to find it because they're in a state of survival. You see, when we're in an executive state, you have this ability to lose yourself, which is what flow state really is. If you think about it, it's just the ability to let go of yourself and just be present. And when you're there, you find this mission in your life that you become so passionate about it, which, by the way, passion is literally translating from Latin roots. It literally translates in Latin to I suffer. That's what passion means. What's the thing that you care about so much that you're willing to suffer for it? Like it's that important to you. And it always has to do with something greater than you. It has nothing to do with you. And how do you find it? Your heartbreaks give you the clues. Right. So when people ask me, like, what's the mission, whether it's for me or for my business, I state it in a very simple way because I'm all about like simplicity, explaining things in a simple way. It doesn't have to sound so complex and sophisticated. It's to cultivate safe spaces. That's my mission. Not only because logically I know what happens to your brain and your body when you don't feel safe and you feel threatened, right? You go into a state of survival, you lose capability of your, critical thinking skills, your performance drops and all that kind of stuff. I understand that intellectually. But why it speaks to me emotionally, because it's a feeling. Passion's not a logical thing, it's an emotional thing. It's something you feel. So the reason why it's a passionate thing for me is I know what it feels like to feel unsafe. I was that kid growing up, that typical Asian American, actually I'm not Asian American, but like that typical Asian kid in that kind of setting where I was going out on a Saturday night with my high school friends late into the night, getting drunk and drinking with them. And I would sleep a few hours, wake up Sunday morning, go to my church that my mom made me go to and lead worship for church friends. I felt so unsafe to just be me because I carried a belief about myself that I didn't matter. I didn't have worth. That I was willing to fight for your approval by just doing what I thought you would want me to do based on whoever's in front of me at the time. I felt so unsafe to be myself. So that's why this mission is important to me too. Every time I work with someone and they create that safe environment for themselves to just tune into themselves and figure out what their passion purpose is, it's also healing for me because it's like my wink to my younger self going like, hey, see, amazing things happen when you feel safe to be yourself and you own it. So that's kind of how you find your purpose. The heartbreaks usually give you the clues, by the way. So that's why it's an important thing for me for creating safe spaces, right? Like that's something I'm willing to die for this mission, if that makes sense. Like I can feel it in my bones.
I love it. So it's for those of the listening out there, it sounds like it's find ways to shift into your executive state, think less about yourself, and then the heartbreaks, like look at what's broken your, like what's really hurt you and where you've healed the most, and then maybe the answers lie within that. And when I heard you say that in the course, I thought of like, yeah, well, I've done like these exercises, like who's my ideal audience for YouTube, the podcast, and it's like people, a lot like Matt Devell, Ali Abdal, a lot of people say, go back to a younger version of yourself and what's their biggest problem. And so I'm like, okay, 20-year-old Berkeley Peter, his biggest problem is he wants to get a job after college. He wants to prove himself. He wants to get girls. Like 22-year-old Peter, about the same thing. 25, like he wants to get, he's leaving VC. He wants to learn how to be a musician. He still wants validation. Like 30-year-old Peter, he's coming back. He's in VC again. Like, but the theme, the biggest problem running through that was all those younger versions of me wanted to prove themselves. They wanted to feel love through
Yes.
performance. And so I think one of the big things with my content is I'm trying to ultimately help people and myself included heal from like, you are loved, you are enough. You don't need to conform to like a job interview question or a job role or a societal expectation or parental expectation. Like you can be yourself and that's good and that's enough. Um, so when I heard that in your course, it really gave me a lot of clarity. So thank you for sharing that.
Absolutely. And that honestly, that was the biggest breakthrough for me, is what you're just sharing there. Because like, I'm sure you can look at those younger versions of yourself and you're becoming more aware of like, that kid's just hurting. That kid's just in pain. And for the first time, probably you're experiencing more empathy and compassion for yourself. It's interesting, isn't it? We think 70,000 thoughts a day, and majority of those thoughts are negative thoughts about ourselves every single day. Same thoughts, same thoughts, same thoughts on autopilot. All these things we don't like about ourselves. And I think one of the biggest breakthroughs I had was when this leader was being asked that cliche question about relationships. How do I find the perfect one for me? How do I find the perfect partner? Which, by the way, is coming from a place of survival, right? It's the brain going, I'm so unhappy. How do I find someone outside of me that I can hold responsible for my happiness, so that whenever
Yep.
I'm unhappy, at least I have someone to blame? Because I don't want to take ownership over this feeling. I don't want to own that. It doesn't feel good. So the leader understood that's where it was coming from. And he just asked a really powerful question, which was, would you go out with yourself? And I remember that hit me like, poof. I'm like, I just immediately noticed my reactive answer was, no, I wouldn't go out with myself, because I have all these things I don't like about myself. But you know what the deeper aha was? Like, I was like, oh my gosh, wait, if I don't have a healthy, loving relationship with myself, I can claim that I do all these nice things for my wife and my kids, but I'm not doing it for them. Then if I'm operating from survival, I'm doing it for me, because I struggle with this low sense of self-esteem. Like, I believe that I don't matter. My brain in the fight mode will go, hey, do these nice things for your wife and your kids, so that maybe one day you will matter. Like maybe one day you will feel like you matter. So it's transactional. Survival is always transactional relationships, and no one likes transactional relationships, and the world is full of them. And that was the biggest realization I had, was if you don't prioritize this relationship with yourself and invest in your growth, you're going to be on the hamster wheel, guaranteed. And how does that start? It's having that compassion for yourself. Every feeling you're feeling is actually just a memory of the past. Think about it. The most vivid memories you carry, there's probably a high level of emotional intensity there, isn't there? You remember more details, your first heartbreak, your first success, the color of the shirt you were wearing, the words that were said. It serves a memory function. It's so that if you remember how hot that stove was when you touched it, you're never going to touch the stove again. It's the same thing with emotional survival. When you're feeling these anxious feelings, these depression feelings, you're remembering. You're not experiencing because what's happening to you right now. You're experiencing it because of what happened to you. You're remembering
Yep.
something from the past. And because the survival brain hyper focuses on the external, you know what I mean? If you're in a dark forest and you hear a scary noise and you feel threatened, where are you going to focus? Your brain can't help but look on the outside. But what happens with emotional survival is it pulls you into this illusion, because your brain goes into survival because it thinks that uncomfortable feeling is a threat. Your brain goes into survival and focuses on the outside. And now we're in this illusion. Oh, I must be feeling sad because of this outside circumstance. Must be because of the thing this person said or that person did. That's why I'm feeling so sad. And we're going into that blame mode. When in reality, if your life's not in danger, the survival state is screwing you over, by the way. And you get better at being an executive state and going, oh, I'm feeling the feeling.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like inside out. Like it reminds me of this Osho quote where he has this parable of like Rabia, she's looking for like this needle and she's out on the road, out like asking all her neighbors, where's this needle? Like, and then like, Rabia, why don't you look inside your house? And she's like, Oh, it's because it's dark in there.
Yeah.
But it was like in there the whole time, but she won't go and look for it. Well,
100%.
if like kind of linking to self-worth, and this is a question for me and probably for a lot of people out there, like how, because I thought about this a lot. It's like, where do we get our sense of self-worth, our sense of love from, right? A lot of people, they get it from being really good at what they do, like what I was doing for a long time. They get it from religion, from God
Sure.
loves me,
Sure.
or I'm all one with the universe, or people get it from their families, their partners. They get it from themselves. I love myself. There's different ways to kind of feel that security and sense of self-worth. And I know you're all about cultivating safety. Like, what's your kind of philosophy on that? Like, where can people get self-worth from, where it's intrinsic, it's innate? Yeah.
Yeah. You're bringing up an important point. Like, so number one is it never comes from the outside, a sense of self-worth, right? Oh, my accomplishments or all the money I have, right? Like, and some people spend their whole lives looking to change things on the outside, but not going inside because, like you said, the house feels dark and I don't want to go inside, even though that's where everything you want usually is. But the moment you go inwards, then you start noticing how these realities we've probably constructed in our brain weren't even real. That's the long-term work, is we have these belief systems in our mind that were structured for whatever reason because of meanings we've attached to experiences in our lives. Like, we interpreted certain experiences in our lives to mean something, right? Because if you get bit by a dog at 4 years old, you might start believing all dogs are dangerous. And a lot of them are false, and it keeps us in a state of survival. One of the things that I do is I question the construct of the belief to begin with, because you're bringing up a concept of worth. Well, then I would question, how is that measured? Why are we trying to measure something that can't be measured? You know what I mean? Like, we don't operate like that. Someone you love, you don't go, today you're worth 5 units of my love, and tomorrow you're worth 4 units. The way I approach it is the structure doesn't even make sense, because we struggle with this belief that I'm not good enough. Based on what metric? How do you measure that? What will make you feel like you're good enough? Oh, maybe if I get the job, maybe if I get this much money, I will feel good enough. But you get that and you still don't feel good enough, just like both of us have experienced, right? We had the 6-figure salary. So then it's to understand the construct is not even real to begin with. We're trying to measure something that can't be measured. Your worth can't be measured. And the sooner you realize that, the sooner you're able to free yourself from the matrix.
What's a better question to ask?
The better question to ask is, what's true then? If you not being good enough is not true, the opposite is also true. You being good enough can't happen either. Does that make sense? It's just, that's the rules of the, yeah. It's a false reality. So it's to ask yourself, well, if that's the case, what's cool about that? Oh, it means I can have whatever I want. I can create whatever I want to create. You see, the concept of something being infinite is scary to people, because when we're cavemen, cavewomen, you go out into uncertain territory, you might get killed by a wild animal. But the better you get at embracing what's infinite is the moment that you start to tap into your own power, if that makes sense, your infiniteness. And one way I like to pose that to, like, it's a little bit like, it can feel like mentally like jarring, but people ask this question, like, there's a famous Buddhist monk that said, one of the most important questions you can ask yourself on a daily basis is, who am I? Right? And I had a mentor of mine, he got to meet the Dalai Lama, and the Dalai Lama leans in and goes, who are you? And he goes, I'm Dave. And he goes, no, that's your name. Who are you? Right? So the thing to understand about that kind of philosophy is you cannot be what you perceive. So what does that mean? I can perceive my phone, right? Like here, like, so I know I'm not my phone. Makes sense. But when you go internally, that's where it gets a little trippy. Oh, I can perceive my body, so I know I'm not my body. I can perceive my feelings, so then that means I'm not my feelings, which is true because feelings come and go. So I'm not my feelings. I can perceive my thoughts, so I know I'm not my thoughts. One of my favorite authors, Michael Singer, he says, you know how you hear voices in your head? Yeah. Well, who's the one hearing them? Do you see what I'm saying? So it goes down to this question of, who am I? And where the rabbit hole leads down is, who you are is this infinite nothingness and this infinite everythingness. So what that means is, like, just like you need the empty space in your house to still be a house, you need this empty space. Everyone has a different label for it, right? Consciousness, a soul, a spirit, whatever you want to call it. But the more you're in tune with that, that's when you realize, like, yeah, you're beyond your circumstances, you're beyond your body, you're beyond, like, you're into this infiniteness. But that scares people to go there, because what if I lose my identity? What if I lose who I think I'm supposed to be? I need this validation. I'm going to have to let go of that. But when you tune into that infiniteness, it's one of the most liberating feelings ever. And this is biologically true, by the way, too. Physicists literally are able to use advanced technology that can look at atoms now, the building block of our cells. And they found that 99.99999% of the atom was just empty space. And it was 0.0000001% particles. So if you put this into perspective, if you have a tennis ball as your nucleus, you have like a grain of salt, like over a mile away, just randomly moving. That's what an atom is. Do you see what I'm saying? Like, that's how much empty space is there. So if you took out all the empty space in every cell in your body, you'd turn into a grain of salt. If you took out all the empty space in every atom in the earth, it would turn into the size of an orange. We are literally just energy. You know what I mean? Like, it's just,
Yeah.
So when you understand how infinite you are, like, as weird as that sounds, and that's one of the things I break down in training and all that kind of stuff, you're able to transcend this worth kind of prison.
Yeah, I like that a lot. Just ask a better question. Like Tony Robbins says a lot, just ask a different question instead of like, why did I fail? It's like, how did I succeed in the past? And like, in this case, it's like, not about self-worth, but like, who are you? And this reminds me a lot about, like when I studied yogic philosophy, like one of my big takeaways from being in India was, you have like 5,000, like thousands of years of history around this belief of this philosophy that we're all one.
Yes.
And when you meditate, you are connecting with what you mentioned, like the observer, right? The witness of the thoughts, of the feelings.
You're back with the collective. Yes.
And and it's like you're a drop returning back to the ocean. And it's like, it's funny because, we're what are we, like 70% of us, like more than half of our bodies like water. It's like, the drop returning to the ocean. And
yes,
I remember when I meditated for 30 days, I definitely felt more compassionate, more spontaneous, because I was like, the person I see on the street, that's like, if we're all one, why wouldn't I be supportive or smile at them or say hi or think about how they're doing? And then you think less about yourself too, because you realize we're all connected.
Yeah. And if you take that rabbit hole too, what you might realize at the end of the day is world is just a mirror. How you treat other people is just a reflection of how you treat yourself. Is that making sense?
Yeah, for sure.
Which is why your relationship with yourself is so important, because you probably treat yourself the same way that you're treating other people.
This reminds me of like Alessa. She was a past guest and my friend. She studied psychology at Harvard, and she mentioned how like a lot of so she's a leadership coach as well. And her most viral TikTok is about it has like 3 million views or something now. And it's about how to control other people. It's like how to motivate other people. And then that's, out of all her videos, that's the one that's popped off. And she thinks it's because people want to control other people. They want to project their insecurities onto others and then control the situation that way. It's like pretty, it's like very human. And it's also really funny because we all do it.
Yeah. 100%.
Hey, Eugene, so how are you doing on time? Maybe it's like, should we wrap in like 5-ish?
Yeah, I have, I'm good till 45.
Okay.
If you need it. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. So, in terms of art and business, right? So you've been a filmmaker, you've built your own business, you've gone viral with a lot of articles. You built up this coaching practice. So you've seen kind of both of those worlds. For a creator, what's your advice on how they should balance creating art, like expressing themselves and doing it for themselves, and balancing that with making something people want? Like a lot of times, like, like Rick Rubin, creative actor, he'll say, just do it for yourself. There's no other audience, just for yourself. That's the work of an artist. Y Combinator, they'll say, make something people want, make a business. That's how you build the Dropbox and Airbnb. And I think a lot of creators want to do both. I know I want to do both.
Yeah.
Like, and Kevin, as you like in the comments, he's asking, how can we, create content that connects? But like, yeah. So I guess what's your take on that?
Yeah. So yeah, you're right. Like that was eye-opening going into both worlds, the business world and the creative world. So I think first off, with the creative world, the first step is really getting better at being executive state. Because if you lose yourself, being in an executive state is the highest form of self-expression, which is what art really is at the end of the day. Great art is a highest form of self-expression. Would you agree? So just by you being in an executive state, you're creating value for others to begin with. Because your empathy's on, you will naturally just do what's valuable for other people because you're empathetic versus I need my validation. I need you to look at me and give me worth and say nice things about me. Just being in an executive state, you will naturally give value for others because of your empathy. Okay. So that's step one, is just getting better at being in an executive state, because then you're not making the art about yourself. You're making it, you're expressing yourself. And that's also a form of love for yourself as well, is to keep honoring what's coming out of you at a core level. Okay. So then on the business side of things, where it gets more practical, is there are just skill sets to be learned. That is what I realize. I know the trap that we go into is we tend to let our skill sets or accomplishments define our worth when it has nothing to do with our worth. Do you see what I'm saying? Because I didn't accomplish this, I'm a loser. Like, that's the thing that we need to separate is, look, skills are skills. They all can be learned. Marketing, skill. Persuasion, skill, right? Writing is a skill. Podcasting is a skill. And it's to understand what are some skills that I need to have if I want to generate some revenue from my art, right? Whatever I'm creating. And there's a couple of things that I always do as a high level from the business side of things, which is number one is just understanding how things work. Then you get to choose and play a little bit with the rules, right? Like in photography, there's a saying that learn the rules first, then break them, right? Just learn the rules of business first. That's simple as that. And I learned these from multiple mentors of mine. If you look at any business, it's really just three things. Number one is an offer that people actually want, like they're willing to pay for. Right? That's the first thing to test out. It's like, if you're going to create something, see how people pay for it. It doesn't always have to be money. Are people paying for it with their attention? Is it getting engagement?
Test the demand, validate
Test
it.
the demand and validate it. Once you have that, the next thing the way to make sure that happens is, how are you convincing them to do it? That's the second pillar of a business, which is a conversion mechanism, right? In the online marketing world, some people will throw the term sales funnel around, right? Like, what's the journey that you convince me to do and persuade me to do that you want me to do, such as watch this video or right? Or join my program. How are you persuading someone ethically? You're not manipulating, you're persuading, right? You're helping them do what's best for them as a next step. How do you persuade someone to take you up on your offer? But what most people don't realize is a conversion mechanism has many conversion points. They think it's just a sales conversation. No, there's a lot of points of conversion, right? If I'm organizing a free meetup, how am I going to convince you to join my meetup? That's a conversion point. Now that you're at my meetup, how am I going to convince you to get on a call with me or buy my service? That's another conversion point. There's many conversion points. So many business owners don't build this first and validate it first before going to the third pillar, which is lead generation. How do I get new people to find out about me? Well, just because new people find out about me doesn't mean they'll buy, which is because you don't have a good conversion mechanism. Because if I had a dime for every time I had that conversation with a client, where it's just like, I'm getting all these leads, but no one's buying. I'm like, well, tell me what you're saying. And they're like, this and that, this and that. I'm like, that makes no sense. No wonder they're not buying. You need to fix your conversion mechanism, explain it clearly, right? Or be more persuasive and all that. Those are all skills. So if you understand, if you look at any business, it's those three things. People make millions of dollars off of one product because they have a good offer that has a validated conversion mechanism that's working, and they're constantly generating leads through their lead generation mechanism, which could be, free talks, free samples, whatever lead gen, right? Like, so those are the three core things. And as a creative, like attention is a commodity. Are you getting the engagement? Are you getting the attention? Are you getting the questions or feedback and that kind of stuff?
Well, can I ask you, like, because I think a customer journey, like having a good product, customer journey, good top of funnel, like having it all like funnel into the end and have a great experience. And I think a lot of creators can be comfortable with that, but I think that's on top of that, a big challenge is, what's your thought on making it for the audience versus making it for yourself? Because I think a lot of people
Yeah.
struggle with that.
So when you're can you specify a little bit more so I can tune into
For
the.
example, for like a content creator, for like for me, I would love to make a video on like I made a video how to find a therapist, because I thought that would be very helpful for people, and I felt very like I could picture friends I was making it for, and I was like, if they see this and it helps them and they find a good therapist, like that is so personally meaningful to me.
Yes.
But it got like 100 views
Hmm.
versus if I make a video that I know people will want. Like I just made this day in the life of an investment banker at Goldman video, and it's actually one of my best performing videos.
Yeah.
But there's a little less of I'm into that, like I'm
Yeah.
doing that more as maybe it'll help someone, and the people that are like the 20-year-old version of me, I can help them and like love themselves in addition to the professional accolades. Like, but that's a little more extrinsic.
Yeah.
Whereas the
I hear you.
therapist one was more intrinsic.
Yeah. That's a great question. So when what I'm hearing you say is like, there's these scenarios where you know what people need, you're passionate about that particular thing, but it might not be what they want, correct?
Yeah.
Right. So that's a skill set thing. That's where persuasion comes in, right? It's a skill of persuasion where both you can create win-win scenarios between what you want and what your audience wants, right?
Mm.
So that's a skill that I teach to every client, which it basically is the skill of persuasion. And by persuasion, I mean you're helping someone convincing someone to take the best next step for themselves. That's persuasion. That's what a good salesperson, ethical salesperson does. Manipulation is you're persuading someone to do something that you want, not what they want. Okay.
Mhm.
So the skill of persuasion is it's an understanding of, when we're in the executive state, we're very empathetic. We're meeting a person where they're at. And the skill you want to develop is you help someone have this aha moment of what actually the problem is, so that they develop the intrinsic motivation and inspiration to do the thing for themselves that's good for them anyway. So for example, the framework to understand is everyone is either in one of four phases of awareness around the problem that they're facing. Okay. They're either unaware of the problem, which is why if a person who needs therapy, you're telling them you need therapy, they're not going to want to look at it. Right. So these are people who are either in denial or they're just oblivious. The second phase is someone who's aware of the symptoms. Oh, I'm experiencing depression, sadness, frustration, anxiety on a daily basis. Maybe I'll take a pill and it's not doing much for me, or it's numbing or whatever, right? And then the third phase of awareness is a person who's aware of the problem. Now we're talking root cause of the problem. What happens to a lot of people is they think they know what the problem is, but it's not the real problem. Right. An example I give is like, coming from healthcare background, imagine you're starting to get symptoms of a cold, right? Your runny nose, fever. So you think you have a cold. So a lot of people will self-diagnose and self-treat. So I go to the pharmacy, I spend 2 weeks taking the cold medicine, buy cold medicine, and take it for 2 weeks, and I'm not getting better. So now I'm getting a little bit more frustrated. But imagine I finally go to the doctor, get some outside support. A great doctor will want you to be motivated to take care of yourself, because that's a big problem. Compliance is a big problem in the medical industry. People just don't treat themselves, right? Take care of their bodies. So anyway, a great doctor might do something like this. Number one is they'll confirm the symptoms with you. Oh, have you been having a fever? Yes. Cold, like runny nose? Yes. Did you try to take cold medicine and it hasn't worked? Now you're like kind of freaked out. You're like, how does he know exactly what I'm going through? Well, probably because he's spoken to hundreds of patients that's doing the exact same thing, right? But you're showing that rapport and that connection. So now I'm ready to hear about what the real problem might be, because after you establish the rapport with me. Is this making sense? Right?
Yeah.
So then the doctor will reveal the problem. Go based on the assessment we're doing here. I don't think you have a cold. I think what you have is bacterial pneumonia. But a great doctor won't just tell you what the problem is, because no one likes being told what your problem is and you leave it at that. Like, you know what your problem is? No one likes hearing that. He'll give you the context, so that you have your own aha moment for yourself. He's like, here's why I think you have bacterial pneumonia. People who are above this age tend to get it more. Based on your age, that makes sense, right? Yes. People who live in this type of setting are more prone to getting it. Do you live in this type of setting? Oh my gosh, yes, I do. People with these types of other conditions are more likely to get it. Which ones of these do you have? I have that, I have that, I have that. And the reason why cold medicine is not working is because cold's a virus. This thing that you have is a bacteria. It's like apples and oranges. At some point, you give enough context, that person will go, oh my God, I have bacterial pneumonia. Then you're motivated for the fourth phase, which is what's the solution. So the reason why in marketing that video might not have done well is you're just touting the solution, how to find the therapist. I'm not sitting here going, I want to find a therapist. I'm sitting here, probably the sweet spot for a lot of people, content creators who are starting off or in the growing phase, is getting really good at confirming the symptom first. How to eliminate your anxiety, how to get rid of stress on a daily basis. And then here's why you're stressed on a daily basis, XYZ, XYZ. Here's the process a therapist brings you through. You're selling the process first. And this is why a therapist is important. Oh my God, I want a therapist now. Here's how you find a good therapist. You got to meet them where they're at with your content.
Interesting. Yeah. Cause it's interesting to hear you talk about like these marketing concepts, but as a coach too, cause it's like the whole AIDA funnel, right? Awareness, interest,
and
desire,
copywriting.
action. And and then also being a good coach, like my coach friends will say, instead of saying the answer, you ask questions.
Ask, don't tell.
Don't prescribe, like ask questions until it's understood. And then it's an inside out decision. Like it's funny to see this two basically being the same thing. You can apply it to coaching, you can apply it to content. Well, in terms of, I think one thing that's really stuck out to me about just hearing your podcast, talking to you, reading your articles is like, you talk about your wife a lot and your family. Like you have 3 kids. When you were in Jubilee, you were married. Your wife was like right on board to drive to LA from New York. Like I know a lot of creators, we work a lot, especially entrepreneurs, and work can take up a lot of our lives. Like what's your advice for balancing being a good partner and having a good family life, good personal life while being an entrepreneur?
So, one of the things I have learned, and I'm still growing a lot, right? I still get triggered. I still get into arguments, especially with my kids, right? Because they're little. One of the things that's been super helpful for me in terms of the relational side of things is learning how to not hold someone else responsible for your happiness. It's easier to blame someone for why you're not happy. And that was a big lesson for me. The story I share a lot is like, I used to say this phrase to my daughter that you're making me so mad right now when she's not listening. But remember, your brain creates meanings all the time based on your past. And I realized the reason I'm saying that is because I'm super sensitive about being perceived as a bad father, right? Because my dad left my family when I was a teenager. I used to think very angry thoughts. Like if I'm ever a dad, I'm not going to be a bad dad like him. So my daughter's not listening. My survival brain's going, hey, she's not listening to you. You're a bad dad, just like your dad. Quick, fight, flight, freeze. How do I fight? Anger, yelling. And all I'm doing to the poor girl is scaring her. And the thing I want to be doing with her, which is connect with her, I'm doing the opposite. I'm disconnecting with her when you're going to survival, right? So I simply changed the phrase from you're making me mad to I'm feeling mad. I'm just owning my emotion. So you see, and that's a healthy place to be with your relationships, to stop holding the other person responsible for your feelings. So that's when I share that story with like a CEO. I'm like, you just said your team's pissing me off. You're pissing you off. Can you tell me, is it the team that's pissing you off? And they're able to take ownership going, no, I play a role in my feelings as well. So that's step one. In terms of when you're bringing up things like balance, right? I honestly don't think there's a formula. You do what works for you, right? Like, for me, I prioritize, I know I want to be able to eat like whatever meals I can with my kids. So I do that, right? I know that I want to be able to pick my kids up from school, take them to soccer. So that's when I end my workday for that day. Do you see what I'm saying? Like, but I do prioritize them. The reason is my family is you see, the people you spend the most time with are the people that can reflect to you where you need to grow the most, but it's hard to go there, because it always puts you face to face with your fears. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So the reason I consciously try to prioritize them is because they keep helping me grow. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah.
Despite how scary and uncomfortable it feels, because your family or whoever you spend the most time with, that's where it gets most vulnerable. All your vulnerabilities come out. But if you're willing to face it, they're the best mirror. And if you're willing to face it, then you grow. so much from it, which is why like I consider them a blessing. Like I said, the world is a mirror. When I find myself getting frustrated with my kid because she's not understanding something that she's trying to learn from school, and I'm explaining it 3 times, 4 times, I'm like, why am I getting frustrated? Oh my gosh, I remember a time that I was trying to learn something and I was having trouble and I thought I was slow, and the teacher yelled at me in front of the class and embarrassed me and shamed me because I had a reputation for being a class clown. She thought I was doing it on purpose. No wonder I'm feeling so frustrated right now versus just being patient, because there's such a thing as other parents who might not behave the same way. So you see, yeah, that's the reason I prioritize them, because whoever you spend the most time with, your vulnerabilities are going to come out, but it's putting you face to face, giving you the answers on how you can achieve the next level of consciousness.
Well, with the time we have left, a few more questions, like kind of more rapid fire, just on finances. What's your take on being an entrepreneur? Like, whether someone should get stable financially first, save up the runway, or work a full-time job and do their side hustle part-time and then dive in once it has traction, or like quit cold turkey, live off the runway. Like, what's your advice for how to think about finances in a responsible way that's also sustainable as an entrepreneur?
I wish there was a formula for it. I think the best I can say about it is, yes, create some runway. Do it on the side while you're building validation, right? Like, and don't spend time building the product. Spend time building the product with others, right? Pilot it with others. Like, hey, I'm working on this thing. Oh my God, that sounds so exciting. Oh, cool. What do you like about it? What do you not like about it? Where's the objections coming? Why do you feel like this might not work versus work? And once you get that clarity, those people that you can help are going to be willing to pay for it. So if you develop some runway, I recommend like 3 to maybe 6 months runway. We had about 3 months runway, but looking back on it, I wish I had more, right? But like, yeah, that's kind of the jumping point will be different for everyone, because I've done both. I've done the cold turkey and I've done the runway thing, right? But it depends on the circumstances.
Okay, cool. And last audience question is, Fee is asking, can you still live a purposeful life even when you're not passionate about your job? I'm starting in iBanking soon, but not sure if I'm 100% in the game for more than 2 years.
Can you live a purposeful life even though you don't like your job? Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Should I elaborate why?
Yeah.
I guess. Because purpose has nothing to do with your job, unless you make your job your purpose. Purpose is it's just a form of self-expression. It has nothing to do with what you do. It has everything to do with why you're doing it. So hopefully you can bring your purpose to your job. That's the better question to ask, right? Like, if cultivating safe space is important to me, I know I'm going to make sure I do that, whatever job I'm at. Like, you bring your purpose. Don't outsource your purpose. Your purpose should be a form of self-expression to wherever you are in your life.
I love it. Okay, super quick rapid fire. Okay, what's the favorite book you read in the last year?
Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself.
Okay. Favorite book on neuroscience?
Mindsight by Dr. Dan Siegel.
If your house was burning down and your family's safe, what 3 things would you grab first?
It wouldn't be if my family's safe, I think just my computer, because my life's work is all in there. That's the only thing that comes to mind. Everything else I'm cool with.
Okay. Yeah. If you could jump into a time machine and go to any place, time for 30 minutes, who would you talk to?
If I could go back, say that again.
If you could go back in time through a time machine into any time or place in history for 30 minutes, who would you talk to?
It would be Jesus, not for religious reasons, but there's a saying that Gandhi said, like, I would have been a Christ follower if it weren't for Christianity. I would just talk to him and be like, was this misinterpreted? Was that misinterpreted? Was this just to do that? Yeah.
That was a good one. And what's your favorite feedback you've gotten from your clients or the people that listen to neurohacking or that have read your articles?
The favorite, the transformation. My relationship was saved. I wouldn't have gotten to this place in business. I would have given up if it wasn't for it. More revenue generation, like all that good stuff that I'm really grateful for.
Love it. And so just the final question is, for that one person listening out there today, what's the one thing that you hope they take away from this whole conversation?
is to prioritize your relationship with you. Um, Exercise the attention muscle from taking things from the outside and bringing it to the inside, right? Because just go inwards more. It's so hard to spend time within ourselves because that's where the feelings are anyway, right? It's not because of the outside.
I love it. And so I know you have your coaching practice, your neurohacking school, you have the neurohacking podcast, you have a lot of articles that have gone viral online. Like, what is the best way for someone out there if they want to connect with you or learn about your practice, your courses, your content?
Yeah, you can always either connect with me on social if you want to like message me there, or you can go to my website and opt in for my email list. I have free trainings in there. It's destinyhacks.co, or the podcast. Yeah, like all of those things you just mentioned as well. You can contact me directly, message me. I try my best to respond to everyone in a timely manner.
And what's your handle on socials?
On Instagram, it's Eugene K Choi, and
All
LinkedIn,
right.
it's the same. Yeah.
Okay, Insta and LinkedIn. All right, Eugene, thank you so much for taking the time out and just chatting with us and sharing all this helpful information. I really do love how your mission is cultivating safe spaces for people, and I feel like you did that for me here, and hopefully whoever's listening feels that as well. So yeah, thanks so much.
Awesome. Thanks so much for having me.